everyone. Good morning and welcome to the city of Detroit. First of all, thank you to Reverend Jill and the wonderful family of Central Methodist for always opening their home for justice seekers like us. We so appreciate you all. Welcome to the city that raised me. I always lovingly call the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, where we birth movements. Thank you all again for being here this morning. I want to welcome Just Majority Coalition, all of the wonderful and courageous partners, and all of you, again, welcome to the city of Detroit. I'm sorry we couldn't bring warmer temperatures and sunshine. I'm actually used to this, so I said this is not that bad. Well, I want to get into why we're here today and the importance of passing the Judiciary Act and expand the court to actually have judiciary that follows the law and not politics and partisanship. But first, I'd like to address the need to have an ethical Supreme Court. I can't believe I have to say this in 2023 as a member of the United States Congress, but it seems that if every other day news reports continue to come out of unethical behavior by Supreme Court justices, first it was Clarence, then Neil, and then Chief Justice and John Roberts and all of these folks, we can't expect our residents and citizens to have faith and really truly believe in the Supreme Court if we can't hold them accountable. They must be ethical. And again, when every single time a person in charge has engaged in questionable behavior, it chips down that trust of the Supreme Court. This is why I'm so proud of Congressman Hank Johnson, who before this was even on the front headline story, he was talking about accountability and expanding the court. So he is someone that is introducing Supreme Court Ethics Act and Supreme Court Ethics Recusal and Transparency Act, which I proudly am supporting. These bills will ensure that the Supreme Court have independent ethics investigation. Think about it, right? This is an independent counsel that would create a process by which the public could submit information for potential violation, and it applies anti-corruption regulations and reporting requirements to the court. Right now, if I had a complaint, there is nowhere for me as just a lay citizen to be able to go and complain about something that they think or we believe is unethical. These reforms are long overdue. We already know that. The Supreme Court is only court in the country without a code of ethics. It's absolutely ridiculous. We must implement binding code of ethics in the United States court. The legitimacy of the court is eroding, and this court is continuing to undermine our democracy. Again, undermining our democracy. We must move with urgency. While these bills move through Congress, it is imperative that my colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee investigate the misconduct of these justices. And let's just be clear, Justice Clarence Thomas should be impeached. I've been very clear about this. He should have never been confirmed in the first place. I was a young person watching. Anita Hill warned us that Clarence Thomas should, again, be removed from the bench. It's time for reforming the court so that it can, again, advance justice and equality. From reproductive justice, education, loan cancellation, gun reform, and so much more. We know this court has an influence over aspects in our lives that are so intimate and so close. Enough of the partisanship. As a lawyer, I know how dangerous it is to, again, put politics before our people. These justices are not acting in the best interest of the American people, as we all have felt over and over again, and they use their lifetime appointments to shield themselves from any accountability. And that's why I'm proud, again, to support the Supreme Court Term Limits and Regular Appointments Act. Again, there's a number of legislative avenues to, again, hold them accountable and do what's right by the American people. Beyond ending lifetime appointments and enacting term limits and holding these justices to a binding code of conduct, we must, again, expand the court. If we do not expand the court, these far-right justices will continue to strip us of our rights, shred our voting rights, already have, and continue to sell our democracy to the highest bidding wealthy friend. More and more people are harmed with each day we do not expand the United States Supreme Court. My residents, from the beginning, one of the few districts around the country that I've been saying it from day one, we need to move with urgency, and we need a court that reflects the American people's values. So again, I thank you all for being here. Thank you for hosting this important campaign and bus tour to make people aware of the need for Supreme Court reform. You picked a great city, one that you will leave with more strength and more passion. We are winning, and they are using any way possible to maintain their grip on power. Remember, that's why we're doing this. And continue to continue to do the bidding of right-wing extremists and strip us of fundamental human rights. I'm a person that was taught very early on by Grace Lee Boggs right here in the city of Detroit. Transformative, meaningful change doesn't happen with who's in Congress or who's in the White House. It happens when we all in the streets demand it. So we're here to do that. And I'm so excited to welcome a really great friend of the movement, Cecile Richards.
Bravo. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. It's great to be here in Detroit with these amazing women leaders. We're here today because the Supreme Court of the United States is no longer a source of justice. Women have had their most fundamental rights stripped away by this Supreme Court, and frankly, we're all living in fear of what is next. Despite their testimony during confirmation hearings reaffirming their respect for judicial precedent, 5 judges on the Supreme Court overturned nearly 50 years of the right to make our own decisions about pregnancy, a decision that is perhaps the most personal one of our lifetime. We didn't lose this right because it was no longer important. In fact, since the Roe decisions, abortion services in this country have become medically safe, and 1 in 4 women in America will have an abortion. And we didn't lose this right because the American people changed their mind. In fact, support for Roe versus Wade is higher than it ever has been. We lost this right because 5 members of the court, 3 of whom were put onto the court by Donald Trump and jammed through by Republicans, these justices decided that their political and religious views were more important than the health and well-being of women in America. And the political backlash has been severe, and the personal toll on American women has been enraging. In state after state, voters have overwhelmingly reaffirmed their desire to live in a country that respects this most basic freedom. And yet this Supreme Court believes they are above the will of the people. Women across America are being denied life-saving medical care because of the Dobbs decision. Doctors are being threatened with jail, and it is no longer safe to be a pregnant person in this country. In my home state of Texas, women continue to come forward, including Amanda Zarowski. Amanda was only able to receive an emergency abortion after she went into septic shock, and it is unclear now whether she will be able to have children in the future. This is 100% the result of the Dobbs decision. The Supreme Court is holding America hostage. Just last week, Justice Alito was prepared to end access to medication abortion for all women because, in his words, it was not shown that they are likely to suffer irreparable harm. This shows just how little he understands or cares about our health or our futures. We know from Justice Thomas's opinion in Dobbs that freedom to make our decisions about pregnancy is only the beginning. He's prepared to revisit other longstanding American rights, including the right to birth control. This cannot stand. Every part of our democracy is at stake. Our right to control our bodies, our right to be safe from rampant gun violence, our right to vote and to fair representation. This court is tainted by unethical behavior, as the Congresswoman said, from lack of financial disclosure to Justice Thomas's wife's involvement in efforts to subvert our democracy and overturn a presidential election. It's beyond time to reform the court so that we can restore the faith of the American people and advance justice and equality, and that's why we're here today. This is not a tomorrow thing. This is a today thing. People's lives are at stake. Women's lives are at stake, and the time to act is now. So it's my great pleasure to introduce a good friend and colleague, Nicole Stallworth, Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Michigan.
Thank you, and welcome again to Detroit. My name is Nicole Stallworth. I am the Executive Director for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Michigan. Our mission at Planned Parenthood Advocates is to advocate for the reproductive rights and access to health care for Planned Parenthood patients and also the communities that we serve. And since the United States Supreme Court made the devastating decision to throw out nearly 50 years of precedent and overturn Roe v. Wade, we have been fighting to restore reproductive freedom here in Michigan and safeguard access to reproductive health care. And in November, Michigan voters turned out in record numbers to pass Proposal 3, enshrining the right to reproductive freedom in the state constitution. However, The role the courts could and should play in securing access to reproductive freedom has become increasingly compromised. This is a fact that cannot be ignored. In Michigan, we've seen significant wins in our state-level courts and our county courts that have aided in our efforts to secure reproductive freedom. But this is not uniformly the case across the country. We continue to see threats in the federal and U.S. Supreme Courts that have frankly and unabashedly undermined our democracy and the will of the people for self-interests and political clout. Despite the fact that the majority of Americans want abortion to remain legal, just recently we've seen the latest in politically motivated rulings coming out of a federal court in Amarillo, Texas, that threatens access to medication abortion across the country. And it's not just abortion access. The U.S. District Court in Northern District, Texas issued a ruling in Braidwood Management v. Becerra case, which struck down the Affordable Care Act preventative services coverage mandate. This decision threatens access to essential preventative sexual and reproductive health care, including HIV prevention, cancer screenings, and so much more. Decisions like these are becoming commonplace, and too commonplace for us not to act. They have been reckless and only further promote inequities and exacerbate already existing disparities. These decisions have placed vital health care out of reach for so many, but especially for those already facing barriers like communities of color, people of low incomes, and people who are living within rural communities. We need our federal and U.S. Supreme Courts to consistently do better. We need structural court reform to meaningfully depoliticize the United States Supreme Court, to include justices with more diverse views, more diverse lived experiences and backgrounds that more accurately reflect the reality of the people of our country in 2023 and beyond. Our court systems were intended to uphold a standard of fairness and impartiality. These types of reforms would restore that fairness and ensure justice is within reach for all Americans. Thank you so much. And at this time, I would like to welcome my fellow reproductive rights advocate, Karen Finney.
All right, I'm gonna have to move this up a little bit. That's when you're the tall girl. I want to put this in context because I'm so grateful to be here in Michigan. But if we weren't in Okay, if we weren't in Michigan, I want you to take a look around. The women standing here have less rights today than we did a year ago. That's what happened. When in your life has the Supreme Court of the United States of America ever said less rights, fewer rights, slippery slope to even fewer rights? I want us to think about that for a minute. Our court is out of balance. It is not consistent with the country that we live in, with the diversity of the country we live in, and as others have talked about, the questions around ethics, they couldn't even be bothered to show up at a hearing yesterday to answer basic questions, as Supreme Court justices have done in the past. But they said, no, we don't need to show up. That says the court feels they're unaccountable to we, the people. But they're willing to use their ideology to make decisions that impact our lives. And frankly, there have been many examples, but the Roe decision, the overturning of Roe, to my mind, is the greatest example of the way this court has perverted the law and bent it to its ideology. Number one, if you think about where the country is, when I first joined the board of NARAL Pro-Choice America, 6 in 10 Americans said Roe v. Wade should be the law of the land. It's now 8 in 10 Americans. And for us, it's not just about access to abortion. It is about basic, fundamental human rights. It is about seeing us as equal citizens in a democracy. We cannot be a democracy if our Supreme Court says we are less equal. That's not democracy. And as a black woman, I want us to remember a chapter in our nation's history when we didn't control our bodies. We didn't control where we sit, where we eat, and our reproductive lives were controlled. We fought and died for the right to control our lives and our destinies, and we are not going back. That is why we are here, because we need to sound the alarm to Americans all across this country. Our court is out of balance. We need to restore justice and fairness and democracy. And we, the people, have the power to do that. Congress has the power to make changes, to create ethics legislation, as the Congresswoman talked about, and the power to expand the court so that we have more fairness, more justice, and we preserve our democracy. And with that, I am so grateful to be joined by Caroline Fredrickson. She is a professor of law at Georgetown. She also served on President Biden's Supreme Court Commission.
Well, despite the weather, it is such a pleasure to be here in Detroit with these incredible women. Thanks for allowing me to speak. So I did serve on President Biden's Supreme Court Commission. We wrestled with a lot of issues. And the reason why President Biden appointed this commission was because even before the Dobbs decision, it was apparent that our Supreme Court was in a crisis, that it was showing so many problems in terms of how it was understanding the Constitution, deciding cases, and basic norms of behavior. So we examined a whole variety of reforms. We looked at term limits. We looked at recusal rules and other ethics changes. And I am a supporter of all of those, deeply supportive. But I came to believe very strongly, along with several other members of the commission, that the only change and the only reform that was actually going to be meaningful in this time was to expand the court. Term limits are vital. We need a court that serves not for generations, but for a finite period of time, like every other Supreme Court in every other democratic country and in every state in the United States except Rhode Island. But that is not going to solve the problem that we have right now with a court that is so radically out of step with what the vast majority of American citizens and constitutional scholars believe the Constitution says and what rights it protects. As you've heard, the Senate had a hearing yesterday to examine the ethics questions around the Supreme Court. And yes, the Supreme Court is not subject to a code of conduct, unlike all of the other federal judges. Well, the Senate Judiciary Committee got the back of the hand from Chief Justice Roberts, who sent a dismissive letter, signed unfortunately by every single other justice, saying, we're fine, we got this, but we know they're not fine. We've seen story after story by brilliant reporters who've been digging in to the luxurious travel, $500,000 yacht trips, gifts, real estate shenanigans, and every other kind of unethical behavior that we could possibly imagine these Supreme Court justices to have engaged in. I know the congressman will tell you that members of Congress actually have rules that they have to follow. They have gift rules. They have disclosure rules. The Supreme Court? No. The Supreme Court, however, is supposed to be our highest institution enforcing rule of law, but instead they've decided they're above the law. But why is this important? We've talked about abortion, a vital right for human autonomy, for health care. But the guns, the problem we have with guns, that every day in America we hear about a terrible incident of gun violence. Why? Because the Supreme Court says we can't do anything about it. But they're also undermining students' abilities to deal with their excessive student loans. With our efforts to control our future against climate change, they are undermining our elections, taking away the right to vote for minority citizens and allowing gerrymandering to be engaged in without any check. And just yesterday, the Supreme Court took a case called Loper Bright Enterprises, which is poised to challenge the deference that the courts rightly pay to the expertise that government agencies have to understand statutes, to ensure that they can regulate in our favor to protect our health care, to protect our environment, to protect our workplaces, to make sure we are safe when we are there. Look, people get it. Obviously, the people in Michigan get it. The people in Wisconsin get it. Look at what they just did when they turned out to ensure that they had a court system that was fair. The people in Israel, they get it. They are mobilizing. So that's what we are doing here. The American people are mobilizing to make sure that we, too, have a court that is fair and just. So thanks, everybody, for being here. Now I'll turn it back over to the Congresswoman for questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Ken. Where else is the tour been? That is not a question for myself. Oh, go ahead, please.
Boston, Trenton, Vermont.
Yes, that's right.
And you're going to
Minnesota.
Minneapolis?
Yep.
Philly, Pittsburgh, Westchester, New York, Newtown.
Yeah, we can get you a list.
Yeah.
Is this the no, they're actually going to Minnesota, another Midwest state. Yeah, they're going to Texas. Hey, you should invite me to that one. Yeah.
Just get on the bus.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. So the question is this a new problem or a long-standing issue? I mean, I think in the recent news about a few of the justices and some, really questionable behavior, ethical actions on unethical actions on their part. I can just tell you in 2019 when I first got elected, we were talking about expanding the court back then because what we realized as duly elected members of Congress and the duly elected president, that much of what the work we were doing continued to be undermined by the Supreme Court. And, my team and I, we had done studies and looked at it and said, oh, wow, we've actually expanded the court a number of times in the past. So we looked at this prior to, obviously, the Dobbs decision and so forth. I think what really raised the flag is the attack on voting rights. It was a really big signal, especially here in Detroit. We were talking about it when I wasn't even in Congress and saying, what could we do? So the expanding of the court is not something new. It's been something continuing to be discussed. I'm a big environmental justice advocate. They didn't even attack that. I mean, they haven't left anything on the table in regards to things that are impacting the lives of my residents. So. No, I think it's an American issue. I know this. What we're doing here is giving credibility for members like myself, organizations that are on the front lines talking about this issue, is really raising awareness. Because I'll tell you, the question I get at town halls is, what can we do? I said there's legislation, there's things that you can do in reaching out to your members and talking to them about not only expanding the court, but ethical standards and conduct. I can tell you, I mean, my residents are like, wait, we might not actually get student loan relief that we've been marching and protesting and demanding for years. We got so close to it, and it was done. And what now is happening is the Supreme Court with a loan servicer that, basically, a corporation is basically bringing this up behind a governor of a state, is bringing this up before court and trying to undermine the decision of, a duly elected president, unlike the Supreme Court justices which are appointed. So I can have some of my wonderful team members here answer some of that question, but I can tell you this is the pathway. We got to raise awareness. When we first introduced many of the legislation we worked on, I'll give an example, George Floyd, Justice and Policing. I never thought we would ever get bipartisan support for that as movement, but people kept marching, they kept organizing in the community. We at least got it passed out of the House, and that brought, again, credibility to the need of that reform. Anybody else want to go? Yeah.
Just quickly, I'll just point out that so Congress constitutionally has the ability to expand the court and to pass these ethics rules. So the more people know and lobby their members of Congress, their senators, their elected officials, that this is an important issue for us, the more support we hope to grow.
I mean, I think that I've heard that argument about, additional folks. I can tell you, I think we all agree that the process and even just appointment and the committee hearing process, I mean, if you watched how some of those confirmation hearings, they were so quick, so fast, and very partisan, and tried to even demand that the Senate do a better job in bringing, again, some sort of process that guarantees us at least to have someone be appointed that, reflects the American, the values of the American people. That's something that continues to happen. But I'll tell you this, doing nothing isn't even an option. I mean, we got to talk about it. And it's not the first or last time that we'll be talking about expanding the court in the future. But again, it is a branch of government that is undermining a United States Congress, the legislative branch, and as well as the executive branch. And we're all just trying to do our job based on us being out in the community, talking to our residents in town halls, getting all the constituent letters and everything. They don't have to do that, and they're literally, again, jeopardizing all the important work that we're doing in coalition and really with the residents in our community. Again, I turn around, and there they are undermining every single moment, every single step we do and move forward on that. So. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not me. I'm just being honest. I mean, not for myself. I mean, nothing's going to stop me. I can't be always thinking about, is this going to go to Supreme Court? How are they going to proceed? And yes, I'm a lawyer, but at the same time, I know we have to move forward and show it. But if anything, it exposes that the Supreme Court and what the worries and really the fear that we all have in regards to some of their actions. But some colleagues do think like that, and I think even sometimes the administration thinks in that sense. But I'm glad that it's not preventing them in passing the access to contraception, that we're not stopping us from passing really, really important addressing the gun crisis in our country, or environmental measures that I think are important. So, again, much of us are moving forward and doing what's right, because again, we have to go back to our districts and talk to our residents, and we're going to again make sure that we're delivering. But unfortunately, there are just a small handful that always consistently thinks about that. I hope they understand we got to outwork them. We got to continue moving forward and not allowing them again to jeopardize the important work for the people. Say it one more time. Yeah, I mean, I talked about some of the legislation, but I'm gonna hand it to you just because, you could tell people.
So the Congresswoman talked about a number of pieces of legislation that are before Congress right now. Again, Congress has the right, constitutionally, to expand the court and also to pass ethics legislation. And so what we need people to do, call your member of Congress. We have power. That is why we're out here, is to remind people it's not hopeless. We can make change, as Michigan showed us. So we've got to call our members of Congress, we've got to call our elected officials, and make sure they know we want them to take action on this legislation to reform the courts.
I just want to add a quick underscore to that, which is to say, let's just remember back, for those of you who studied American history, to the 1930s, when President Franklin Roosevelt faced a Supreme Court that is very similar to the one we have now, was extremely right-wing, and was blocking incredibly important legislation that needed to be passed to ensure that the United States could pull out of the Depression, that people who were hungry and homeless could be fed and housed, that we could pass critical legislation to protect workers who wanted to join unions and make sure people earned a fair wage and overtime. Well, you know what? President Roosevelt said he was going to expand the court then too. Well, so this right now we have two options. We expand the court, or the court changes itself. If they're not going to change themselves, then we'll have to expand it. But we have that historical marker about how change can happen.
Oh, no. No, I don't. Honestly, I don't think this is like partisan. I know that there's the extreme views of folks that have, taken strong positions regarding it. If you look at people that are pushing for expanding the court, it tends to be, members like myself and others that, really want to see the court reflecting many of our values and lived experiences. I love that Nicole talked about that. But no, I mean, I've seen many colleagues among my own Democratic caucus believing in different kinds of approaches. It's about politics, y'all. I really think that can have a D or an R next to it. It's really about politics and power and control. And really, the biggest fear I have, and I can't say everyone shares this, is the level of access by corporations to our Supreme Court right now. And the fact that, seeing some of the reports that came out, it makes me fearful, like, how many more are we going to hear about or are not aware of that they have more access, influence? I mean, we're talking about private planes taking some of our Supreme Court justices to, various events and covering costs of those things. I don't know about you, but that is something that I know in my community and residents are incredibly fearful that that person that paid for that private plane ride has more of an influence on this Supreme Court justice than the American people. That's where it comes in. And I don't, to me, it doesn't stand with a party. It's about corporate corruption and access to our Supreme Court justice in the way, again, that we see some of these decisions and now we're questioning whether or not, many of those Supreme Court justices are more concerned about the leakage of the Dobbs decision than they are about their colleagues not showing up to the Senate hearing. About their colleagues taking those kinds of gifts and being influenced in that way. Yeah, so that's why I keep having Karen come up. I think what is said before, look, there are legislation right now being considered in Congress. Get to know what those is, but, even picking up the phone, you don't have to know a bill number. I always tell when I do trainings, you do not have to know a bill number. You just know you want change. Talk about what it means to you. For me, many of the residents I've worked with in the past on environmental justice and We Have a Right to Breathe campaign are so concerned about the previous decision about not allowing states to have that kind of authority around air quality. Those are things that I'm like, talk about that, what that impact on your life is. If it's reproductive access, if it's the student loans, which I hear about every single day, like when are they going to make the decision? People made plans based on the decision by the Biden administration for that debt relief of wanting to purchase a home, making really important decisions for their family. So call your members and talk about how you're being impacted again by the Supreme Court justice taking on these cases that again really directly impact the lives of our residents in a very, very deep, direct way. So that's what you do. You got to talk about that in many, many ways. You don't have to know a bill number. You don't have to know approach. Your member of Congress can figure it out as soon as you express your anger, your emotion. I hear it. It inspires me to work harder. I just know that more members need to hear those stories. I'm not that cold. I really am not. I'm not. When I was talking, I got cold. I was telling her I got cold talking maybe, but no, I'm fine. This is not that bad.
You're tough.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.